everybody. Sorry for the late start. It's been a morning, but welcome back to Reaper Pro-Tips with me, your host, Anne. Disembodied Hands, Quindy, Disembodied Beard, John, Kiki when she feels like showing up, and, well, that's pretty much it. I guess we get a Phantom Ron every once in a while. Yes, it still sucks. It still sucks at this point. Yeah, we'll fix that. I'm actually thinking I shouldn't, but I'd considered using a Games Workshop skull because it was plastic. That would be insulting. So I'll have to use a Reaper skull and metal for my little spell effect that I want to do. But yeah, so we're not going to do that today, though. We're going to get this basing blocked in. Oh, and I need to grab the base that I need, which should be back here somewhere. Yes. Awesome. Bases are bases. So these are the smallest oval bases that I could get. Blook. I think it's supposed to be a spell effect, Agent Marble. I'm pretty sure that, like I've said before, it's probably supposed to be spell energy, but because this is metal, if you put a lot of, if you put a spell effect in there, you're gonna probably, if you make it any size, you've got to make it a separate piece, which is going to cost the buyer money. Essentially, it's charging you extra just for a lump of metal that looks like a spell effect. And it's going to cost you more because it's a big chunk of metal. So essentially, Tom's just suggested that there's a spell coming out of the hand. I've seen this. This is pretty common, honestly, in the olden days of lots of things being metal. But it's entirely to save you guys money. It's just sad that it looks like a hanky, but, or socks. Whatever you would prefer to I prefer to think of it as a Bon Voyage hanky, but yeah, so essentially it's just, the purpose of it is just to save you money. Because otherwise you're charging, you could really escalate the cost by putting a whole nother piece of metal in there, and having to cast it and pack it. More than you think, But yeah, so that's entirely what it's about. Ah, boy. It's funny. It was so funny. I feel like I woke up, but I didn't wake up. And then, when David was ready to go, I was having a dream where I was so tired and so didn't want to wake up. I was at CrossFit, and I learned that they were, running 40 miles, and I just noped out because I was so tired I was falling asleep. And then I woke up. It was I wanted more sleep this morning. And David has been, for some reason, sleeping late lately, so and then I wake up and then I have to hurry. A flag, usually, Pendrake. Oh, a toy spider. Whoa. Sock summoning. I don't need sock summoning. I lay out my socks the night before. Alrighty. Well, this is still big. And it's still going to be... I just wish there was a better... Okay, so the other option, so that should I wish to plastic this, is to cut an actual base myself out of plastic card and build it up. I do have super thick plastic card. We could do that. Or we could just try to work with this. I still think I should put a skeletal kitty on the base, honestly. I probably have extra tombstones around somewhere. But this is a little smaller scale, so I don't think my tombstones are actually in scale. So it's you got two options. You can either go with the bigger setup and try to make more of a scene out of it. Or you can try to create your own base with plastic card. I like the black. I like the plastic lip. I guess this isn't that bad. There's just a lot of room. So, in keeping with the rules of composition, we want to shove the model all the way to the back of the base. And if I'm going to build up Earth and put Ed up a level, then I want to essentially make sure that that's fleshed out back here. Or I can do green stuff. I am inclined with something this big and flat, with all dioramas. When you just use the flatness of the base and you don't elevate the main character at all, it tends to feel extremely boring. So we will likely use cork to elevate Ed. I just have to figure out... I'll just have to figure out if Sorry, I had to check chat to see if there were any relevant questions. I'll probably have to figure out if I want to use big cork or little cork. Big fat cork. Could use big fat cork. Big fat cork, just the thing about big fat cork, I like to use it on giants and things, and I like to use it for big cliff faces, right? But when you're dealing with a smaller rise like this, or like the stone we were building yesterday for Angry Link, then the problem you run into is that these big chunks tend to look a bit out of scale. So the big cork I find is really good for 54-72 millimeter, or for giants, or for like big dioramas where you are dealing with larger, like big chunks of earth that are being exposed, stuff like that. Or for cliff faces where you're expecting bigger chunks of stone. But when it gets down to doing a little base like this, where it's just a little lip of earth or a hill that Ed is standing on, then you really want that smaller cork. And the smaller cork is actually easier to find because it's used for coasters. So it's super easy to find. And you can still stack it up to get some height to it, just as we did here, to make a decent high up base. But we are a little bit limited here because this base is so long. So we really like have a big flat, not really doing much surface here. Now what we could do is we could terrace this. We could actually put Ed up, blend in the edge of this with green stuff, and put the skeleton on a lower plane if we wanted to. But it doesn't really make sense because these guys are probably crawling out of a grave of some sort, and it's probably on the same level. So we probably are stuck with this and just making more interesting earth cover around the front of this base. All right, everybody's talking about fish toys. We're all good. We're all good. Yeah, I was going to say, most toys that move on their own don't move naturally, and so often animals will be very wary of that instead of intrigued by it. Catfishing pole is the better choice, because then you can make it move like a real live thing. Quindy, take your allergy med. I had a bad allergy day while you were gone, and that's why I sent you that random message. All right, so Chonky, probably a little bit too much. Putting Chonky back. The other thing that Chonky does is it limits you as to, like, you really can't build something like this where it's a little bit irregular. You have to go with that big chonk, right? You're stuck with the chonk. Stuck with the chonk. Now, that said, if you wanted some bigger boulders, you can rip out parts of the chonk like this. This makes a great boulder. And you could stuff those onto a base, kind of nestled against the lesser cork, and that would help to give you better scaling if you wanted that sort of thing. So we'll keep the big cork around. But it did remind you to take your one day in the last week. One day. I need to just send Quindy a reminder. I need to set up auto texts for you, Quindy. Oh man. Yeah, that's a problem. What I think I'm going to do, the more I think about it, Crows, is I'm going to do the skull idea that I had. But instead of messing with this right away, I'm going to build the skull effect separately. I'm just going to bend a wire and get kind of some tendrils going on and then wrap them around the skull that I'm going to use or pin them and glue them in. And then I'm going to sculpt it, and then I'm just going to pin it into this and sculpt over it. Like, I think that's the way I got to do it. I got to do it all separately until it comes down to where I need it here, and then I need to worry about that. So, yeah. All right. So we need some cork. We need some cork to put Ed and his friend up higher. And I'm probably going to use this shape that I've got right here. I should be able... And this also allows us, by the way, to, if we want to expand the base a little bit. We don't have to worry about Ed hanging off the back then with this big base. The other thing we could do is cut and take down chunks of this base to make it smaller. I'm reluctant to do that because metal these days is so hard. We would really need a saw, and we would really risk damaging the model. So if you're going to do any of that base truncating or slicing off, you really want to do it before you paint on this kind of thing. So I'm going to do this, I think. And I'm gonna kind of guesstimate where the base is underneath. And I think I'm gonna, if you want to, you can always use a marker or a pen or a pencil, though I don't know how well the pencil will work, but we can try it with the ebony pencil. Yeah, it works. And kind of guesstimate where it's going. So, like, boom. So you can only barely see the ebony pencil tracery here, but it's probably pretty close. Close is good enough. If you want to make sure that you're good, then actually slice a little further out than this. It wouldn't match very well on this. The problem is there's more than one skeleton coming up out of the ground here, Pendrake. I don't see an obvious grave. And there's no good place to put the tombstone or tomb marker either. So for this, I don't think I want to do that. But that's why. It's because I've got this round shape. If I had a long rectangular base, then that would be a great option to do that. But otherwise, people might be kind of like, what the heck is that? If I did it. Fresh grave would have that mound, remember? But nothing else, nothing older would have that mound. So otherwise, graves just tend to flatten into the landscape. So that's what I'm thinking about these guys, because they're all bone, right? So they've degenerated. We'll probably do some of the NMM on this guy once I get this figured out, by the way. Let's see here. So I'm going to perforate. So I didn't really stop and slow down and show you guys how to perforate yesterday. So perforations, you're just going to go and you're going to slice, and you're just going to press. So you don't have to slice it perfectly. You're going to move, kind of like a knitting needle. Think about a knitting needle. You're just going to move your knife around and you're just going to slice down. You are essentially creating a perforated line with your cork. So then when you go to rip it, you'll get a ragged edge still. You won't get a clean cut, right? You get something that looks more natural. Because you're really just poking down the edges of your knife. So you will get some. What the heck is that as a common critique? Yeah. So you will get some even cut from that, but you can, usually it's near the upper lip because that's where you've perforated, and you can just gently just keep working it. There we go. So we've got that. Now we can see how well our thing, actually that fits pretty well. All right, win. See if Ed, he does overhang a little bit. Dang it. So I may have to green stuff that. And I think I want to put this guy at a little bit of an angle. So we may have a lot of green stuff to do on this base, guys. A lot of green stuff. Lack-a-day. There we go. But I can at least get this little guy to fit, more or less. And that'll be okay. That's a win. I wish I could put, since I still have this, and since the break is perfect, I could add extra by taking this extra bit. So let's do that. We haven't ever done that before. So we kind of hold this up, figure out where you split off, right? Where you need extra, right here, right? Where this lip comes in. And by the way, you could pin these together with lengths of wire or toothpicks even, if you wanted extra reinforcement. We shouldn't need it because Ed here is going to be a slab of metal gluing everything together anyway. So let's see here. I want to project a little bit. So I'm going to stitch and get extra material. And this time I'm going to go pretty generous because I can always claw it back. I just want enough to rip it. So that was a lot more of a jagged. You can see how I've got just these jagged marks. It should still be enough for me to pull this off in a natural way. There we go. All right, so because we took this off, this will nestle perfectly where we had it. I can just use some super glue. I'll use some gel because I want the gel to kind of sit on the top and then glue these guys together. If I put a more runny super glue in to glue corks together, it will just soak in and it'll be a lot harder to make it adhere. But the gel should harden and hold this in place really well once it does. And then we can start poking at it. There we go. Perfect fit. So I can keep this together. I just need to press it for a minute. So that's how you can expand it. When you do that and you're like, oh, it's too small, dang it, right? Because you didn't quite measure it out. You just chose to eyeball it. All you have to do is you work with, this is why it's always good to work with a bigger piece of cork than you need so that you have the ability to do this if you need to. Now this is going to extend over that lip, so it's going to be not flush with the base, and I'll probably need to do I'll probably glue it in place with that flexible scope modeling paste actually, which is just such a good tool because I can add a little bit of height to the center and glue it down at the same time without using super glue, but it'll still hold it in place. So that's why modeling paste is your friend. Modeling paste. And so much easier, you don't have to mix it up like you do epoxies. But it's still more than enough to hold this in place, especially once I do green work and all the rest of the stuff I want to do. So let's see how Ed looks now. Let's take him off of the base a little bit. So now I have plenty of room for Ed. There we go. So we can actually fit the whole thing on there. It's good. I can do some green stuff or putty disguising this. And I can build this up. So we'll still keep the lip of Ed. So this will actually put him up even a little bit further, right? On a little rise on top of this little hill on top of the base. So that, what you're trying to do is to get more dynamic and more natural. You're trying to, instead of having a predictable standing flat figure, you're trying to give it height and a visual interest on the base so that suddenly it looks more dynamic, right? It looks so much cooler. Even before you add the basing materials and figure out what your scene is, right? So I think this is a good fit. I think it's going to work. the modeling paste, I just love it as glue. Like when I'm working with cork, specifically Agent Marvel, if you're going to start working with cork, which honestly it's the easiest way to bulk up simple bases to make minis, give minis more impact, visual impact. So if you're going to work with cork, I really like it for working with cork. I really, really do. It even makes a decent texture paste. Honestly, it's made for that. If you pull that out and you just mix some sand or some flocking into it, it's just as good a texture paste as you're going to buy in the store. I mean, that's really what it is. Normally texture basing materials are just like glue, some sort of goo mixed with sand or flocking, and so you can make your own. The fingertip happy gesture. It's like not even something I noticed, Zachariah. So I found out about something fun actually since Zachariah and Turgeon are here. I found out I've been as I mentioned, I've been working to get my books available to libraries, and I believe they are now. I checked my dashboard, and at least one of the main library systems, Overdrive, should now have my book available. It doesn't mean it's going to be in a library until a library buys one, but the library can now buy my ebook and my print book. They can buy a print book from Ingram's, and they can buy a ebook from Overdrive. So now my books are available all over. But this means that there's a really cool thing, and sadly I missed the previous one. There's a cool org called the Indie Author Project that essentially works with the public library system to get more indie authors into libraries and to promote local ones. So they run a contest every spring to kind of pick out the best indie books. Yeah. If you go to your library will be able to order one. And that would be pretty cool, Agent Marvel, if you actually asked your library to order one digital, and they did. That would make me happy. East of the Sun is the only one up there right now. I'm going to put West of the Moon up there. I just need, working with these platforms, it's a time sucker. I'll tell you that. So actually, I'll put that on my to-dos for tomorrow. Get West of the Moon into Overdrive. That's a good idea. I'm looking for things to do tomorrow because the cleaners are coming, and so I'm not going to be... Get West of the Moon OD. I also need to go and get... West of the Moon never got into hardcover because I just got overwhelmed. So I need to do that too. But yeah, so the good thing is I can enter the competition and maybe get extra visibility for my books. There's actually cash prizes. But I'm pretty honestly, I'm pretty confident in my ability, comparing myself to other fantasy writers. I could enter fantasy or young adult, but I think I'm going to have a better shot in fantasy. But yes, you absolutely can order. If you give me a little, you can absolutely ask the library to get East of the Sun and soon West of the Moon once I get it uploaded into Streetlib. But yeah. So that's cool. All right. But yeah, and then I'll enter that competition, and hopefully maybe I'll win. One never knows. First prize is $2,500. Second and third are $500 each. But getting second, I'm not really in it for the cash. I want to do it so that libraries get more aware of my book, and my book gets more publicity. So that is the point. Cool. Hey, Lunatic Design, how's it going? Sorry, we're kind of paused here because I'm waiting for my glue to set. My cork base wasn't quite big enough, so I had to glue a piece of cork on so that I could do this. But I think now, guys, just to get it set, I'm gonna stop and I'm gonna finish up the bone here on the Skelly hands, and I'm gonna finish up the Skelly's own metals. He's also got a little bit of cloth. We can make him red to match Ed. So we'll do that. That'll be our next thing to do. So I just wanted to get the base kind of started. But we'll do some painting today because we did basing all yesterday. Nice, Lunatic, nice. Yeah, we did basing all yesterday and set up a cool base for our elf dude that I can work on as we work on him, and I'm really happy with how that's turning out. So now it's Ed's turn, but I do want to get all this paintwork done. So I'm gonna kind of pop this guy down. I think I'm gonna pop this guy down up against the sticky tack so I can reach his other angles. There we go. I'll just press him into the goo, and that should hold him enough for me to paint him. So let's get the correct depth of field for what we're doing. There. Yeah. Hello, Reaper John. Yep. It's old Ed. I gotta do... It's quite a bit, but let's just start with blocking in the metal on here. We're gonna rust it out pretty much. And we'll put the base aside, and we'll work more on the base as we go. So now I need a palette. I thought I was going to be able to get away without a palette today, but alright, so for this metal, it's going to be darkened down. If I was going with shaded metallics, I would start pretty light, just so I could darken it and get some interesting patterns, and I will probably do that with this. So let's start with our standard for my steel NMM, which is cloudy gray. But this time we're going to put a bit of brown in it. We could start with something like stone gray. You know nothing about minis. They are super cool. I went to school for art, but I think I actually learned more about acrylic technique. In fact, I'm willing to bet you that I learned a lot more about acrylic technique when I started painting miniatures. All right. Boop, stay, Ed. But yeah, in fact, I kind of feel like my college experience was not awesome. Just because I feel like I actually made more progress self-teaching. But that could be just the way that my brain runs. All right, so we're gonna do a little bit of brown liner just so I can have a shader. We're also gonna add a little bit of that brown liner to my gray. Let's get these guys over here. So that's gonna be our liner, a shader. I wanna go brown because I wanna go dirty. So this is going to darken the cloudy gray, but that's all right. We'll see how much and how brown it goes. It should just go darker because of the high black content that we're dealing with there. I want a brush. I want this brush. And I want my mixing brush. Where'd it go? There it is. I am just like spewing tools across the table. I need to put a few of them away. There. Much better. Much better. All right. There we are. But yeah, this is a tribute mini to our CEO lunatic. Ed passed away a little over a year ago, on just after Thanksgiving. So one of the sculptors who knew him for ages, Tom Meyer, who works mostly for Dark Sword Miniatures, did this tribute sculpt of Ed as a necromancer summoning undead. Which, you know, being CEO of Reaper, this is suitable. And we are just painting it on stream. Yeah, I like that, because the thing that brown liner gives you is it doesn't push things as brown as using like a different brown to mix into this wood. You still get that shift, that dirty shift, but you don't quite get, let me see if I can find my stone gray. Do I have stone? Yeah. Stone gray is very brown. You see, it's kind of yellowy almost, right? So if I want things to stay kind of colder but still dirty, I'm going to go with this. And then I'm going to mix up my brown liner, which we will use to do a wash on this chainmail. One of the rare instances that I would probably do a wash would be on this chainmail coif on the skeleton. And the reason is it's so freaking fine. Because Tom sculpts stuff just so freaking fine. This is almost not dry brushable. I could probably side brush it, and when I highlight it, I will, but I'm going to use a wash to get in the little tiny details. Alrighty, so now we've got this, we can actually block it in. If I want to preserve my zenith here, the shadows that I've got because of the way I primed, then I'm going to want to work kind of with wet blending or with thinned paint. So I think I've kind of, let's see if I'm thin enough. Yeah, I think it's going to preserve it a little bit. If not, then I need to take steps to wet blend as I'm adding this base coat. If you've got too thick of a base coat, you're going to have to essentially add in a little bit of blending to preserve that dark shadow. My gray was actually covering pretty well, so I decided to add in a little bit more of that brown liner. Just picking up little bits of it and putting it in where the black used to be. And that'll just help me remember where these things are. And up here, I'm going to do the same thing, except actually I'm going to only paint over the darker area at first. That'll let me know exactly where I am. And then I'm going to wet blend that in to preserve that shadow. And then I'm going to work out from there while that brown liner mixture is still wet. There we are. Alrighty. So now we can still see that shadow. If I've got too much of a demarcation line here, it's still wet enough for me to work with it. It's kind of, it's a bit overcast here today. I think we've got some humidity going on, so it's actually pretty easy to wet blend in this climate. Unlike when it really dries out here during the summer, when wet blending is definitely a trial. There go, better blended. I feel like I lost a little bit, but that's okay. I know roughly where my shadow is. There's a little bit of dent in his helm too up here. I can accentuate like that. My brown liner is pretty thin right now, but what that does is essentially lets me layer a little bit with it like it just did on that dent. I want to darken it down before I do anything too deep. There's also a couple dents down here and divots. So I can pop those out with the brown liner. Now I want to get this whole coif. Yeah. Yeah, so you can wet blend with the best of them there. If you have a lack of humidity, then yeah, it kind of depends on how you're going to do it. It can be hard to paint in arid climates. I actually add more water to my paint, and I do a little bit more paint on the Mini sometimes when I go to arid climates to paint. But here in the South Bay area, usually our humidity is like over 50%, so I usually find it, at least at this time of year, I find it easier. So again, I'm wet blending to preserve that zenith that I did, guys. Usually find it a little easier to wet blend. Now I'm still going to be doing a wash on this. It's just that I'm not going to do it quite yet. And the fact that I darkened my gray means my wash will be not quite as dramatic, but it's still fairly light gray when you're going over white. I actually talk about this in my new companion PDF for the priming video that I did for YouTube this month. The one, it'll go public when I finish the next video. But I talk about the fact that you've got to remember when you're putting lighter, medium to light colors over white primer that it'll wash them out. It'll actually make them look even lighter. Just as black primer will make dark colors look even, mid to dark colors look even darker. So you get a little bit of that effect, but when you continue adding paint, that diminishes, right? That effect diminishes because the minute you have an opaque layer on, it really doesn't matter what your primer was. All right, there we go. Looking pretty okay. So I've got that. So, and then the sword blade, which is probably all rusted out. I tend to start with a middle color, mid to mid dark lunatic, and then I work up. However, if I'm painting black, I'm going to start with the shadow. When I paint skin tones, I actually start with the shadow and work up. It depends. And it depends by the painter. Some people will paint differently than me. Many of them will probably, because I'm an oddball in that I don't use a wet palette. So a lot of people are going to actually block in mid-light shadow all at once using a wet palette, more like a traditional canvas painter with a palette. But it's totally dependent. It's totally dependent on what you're doing. But for me, for NMM, because I want to control where my shadows and highlights are appearing, because I'm using non-metallics to convey metallic effects, I like to start in the middle so that I can purposefully locate my shadows and blend down and then go up to the highlights. My primer on this, however, was Zenith, which means I primed black initially, which is what you see in the cracks, and then I sprayed white over the top. So it helps if you don't understand where your highlights and shadows go, if you're not coming from a 2D background where you regularly have to imagine that sort of thing, which is most miniature painters. I have to do the hilt too. So for non-metallic metals, I always start as a mid-dark. So on a value scale, which I use a lot with my color wheel, a value scale 5 is about where I start with most NMM. You can see that actually. that I'm right about with the mid gray. I'm right slapdash, right on a 5. A 6 maybe, depending on what I'm painting. Yeah, well then exactly you're gonna learn as you paint in 3D. You're gonna get a feel for what you want to do. Some of it's gonna be based on what color primer you set up, but as I mentioned, once you put a solid enough coat over the top of the primer ceases to matter. There are many colors that I like to start dark with because as I also come from a 2D background and I've always had the problem of not making my shadows dark enough. So for colors that I know I tend to struggle with that way, I will start darker. I will start with my shadow and work up. Also, if I'm trying for a very dramatic effect, like a very strong dramatic lighting, I don't think we've got any, but yeah, we do. Then I zenith this guy because I wanted more of a light. But like I went with I left a lot of black primer back here and it reminded me to go darker. Like even with the skin tone. This is like a barbarian that we're painting as kind of a vampire. I'm still finishing up my Halloween minis, can you tell? So I would say adapt your 2D, however you do color and composition in 2D and however you start. Look at starting that way on miniatures. Sometimes you're going to feel like it's maybe extra work, and there are definitely like certain techniques that are faster. It depends on if your goal is to paint a lot of models for gaming in a short period of time, or if you are really much more into like creating little works of art because it's fun. So ask yourself, part of your answer is going to be depending on how fast you want to work, because if you work with washes, you're going to want to start with, say, a mid, maybe even a mid light, because you're going to be putting a wash over everything and it's going to run down into all the cracks and outline all your details for you. It's going to be much faster. But there the fastness stops, because if you want to produce little works of art, if you want to get good, you're going to find, probably, as I did, that washes actually do not save you time from that point forward. They actually cost you time, because you have to then bring up your mid again over the top of that wash. And that takes time. That's an extra step, and it's a big step because you're putting a lot of paint down instead of like layering small areas, which is much faster. Well, you're going to have some challenges. Yeah. I mean, honestly, throwing color at it and seeing what sticks probably will put you in pretty good hands. You probably want to use a wet palette then instead of a well like I do, although you could. I always advise you try both. Mastering paint consistency. Paint consistency on minis is super important. Much more important. Or equally or more important than canvas, depending on how you work in canvas. I don't know what your style is. If you're illustration style, then you're probably like starting from a good vantage point because you're already using probably thinned paints to get smooth, gradients and layers and stuff. If you work more in an impressionistic style or something where you're preserving the texture of your paint, this is going to be a reach for you, and you're going to have to learn to work with thinned paint on very small surfaces. So depending on that would be like, well, which palette should I use? I usually recommend using both a wet and a well. The well allows you to control very precisely how wet your colors are, and if you do a decent paint puddle, which I usually is like 6 to 8 drops of paint and water, maybe even a little more, this will stay at this consistency for, even in an arid climate, it's going to stay at the consistency I need it for at least 15 minutes. And in a wetter climate, it could stay there for an hour before I have to add water. So if you're not used to judging paint consistency, the well palette is very useful for that. But if you, as a canvas painter, already are well acquainted with thinner paint and working with thinner paint, using smaller, thinner brushes, then you probably could manage a wet palette and it would be better. It would let you, as you say, just throw things at the model and see what looks good. And of course, the great thing about acrylics is you can always paint over it. You're going to want to keep your paint a little thinner on that first coat, because if you do build up too many layers of thick paint, you will notice that you're adding texture to the surface, which with miniatures you typically don't want unless they're bigger figures. But if you keep your paint thinner, you can repaint a surface completely, like 5 or 6 times before you start to lose detail. I've done it when I really couldn't decide on a hair color for one model because I chose a really odd armor color, and I was just having, I swear I swapped to every hair color under the sun before I finally settled on one. So I repainted that hair complete with shadows and highlights 5 times before I started to lose detail. But I also thinned my paint. My base coats are 4 drops of paint, minimum to 1 drop water. So I am working with thinner coats, and that means I can get away with more before I start to fill in detail. So yeah, it's an interesting road coming from 2D to 3D. Some things will really, really give you a kind of an extra rung up the ladder, like being able to visualize your light and shadow puts you ahead of most painters coming into the hobby who are coming from gaming and who really don't have any art background. So if you understand shadow and highlight, you're going to know where to put your highlights and your shadows. You're going to have a grasp of that, and it's going to help you depending on what style you want to paint in. If you have a grasp of color that comes to you with 2D, then that will also help. But what you don't have any more of than anybody else is going to be the super fine motor coordination, depending on the scale you normally paint in and how detailed your paintings are. But canvas tends to work bigger. So having the fine control to do things like the lines between these little fingers, like that's where the challenge comes in then. For a 2D painter, you're at the same level as anybody else on that. You probably have slightly better brush control because you've been used to using pencils to sketch, and you've been working with implements like this for a while. But when it comes down to it, you still have to learn like the techniques and how to apply them, and think at a much smaller scale unless you're going to be working on bigger models. If you work on big busts, for example, they're definitely larger models. You're probably used to them. Yeah, you can do that, or you can use zenith priming. Like I said, I just did a priming video. It's going to be up on my YouTube, Lunatic, for free, probably in a couple weeks. Whenever I shoot the next one, I put the Patreon one up for free at that point. But it talks about the different types of priming. One of them is zenith, which is what I did on this model, where you are priming from. Did I do that? No, I have it in the other room. But you're essentially. Let me grab it. Hold on. Let me show you. One moment. So depending on your paint consistency, this is not a Reaper model, disclaimer. You're shooting in black, the whole model. Then you're spraying in white you're spraying in white from the key light position. And then, depending, you can either paint with thinner paint, like I was kind of trying to do, or you can wet blend as you go, like just to remind yourself of your shadows so you don't lose them, as I did there. Or you can take pictures like you were talking about from all the key positions so that you can have a reference for how your light should be. Most times with miniatures, the light source is going to be coming diffused above. That's what most people like to do. You can also do strong from the front, which is, I should get Clint. 1 second. So the more advanced you get, the more you can work with directional lighting positions. It can be a little bit difficult. It tends to work best on big models like busts. The one that that David and I just did, this is our first co-op piece, our first collaborative piece. We painted it for my brother for Christmas. So it has a strong frontal light, frontal and sides. So the back is in shadow. So you definitely see the difference. You can see where the light is coming from very easily. David is really good at that. And then as you turn it, you can see the shadow. That's difficult for a lot of people to do when they're coming in the hobby with no art background. You can also see kind of the bluish reflected light over here on the skin. I was in an instructive mood today. Yeah, I mean, you can definitely do do I have that? No, yes. So I didn't spray. I didn't underspray this guy, but we did paint him with reflected light. And I'll show you the other one I've got. That's David's. My husband is really, really good at light. It's his free card, Lunatics, so he's an amazing light painter. But when we did Mouseling's got a light source, painted from the front with a warm light source. As you move around, you can see the reflected light on the back. There is somewhat of a mid-shadow running down. It's also, though, you've got to remember... No, this stream is about derailing, Lunatic. This stream is about derailing. Everybody thinks we're a painting stream. We're not. We're a talking stream. We're an explaining stream. So you can kind of see I've left a little bit of a mid-shadow right down the line here. But you got to remember scale. Because mid-shadow is going to be, when you really think about it, the mid-shadow on a model that's this small would be vanishingly small. So I didn't concentrate on leaving one. I concentrated more on using my cool light to highlight back here, and not to the same level as I used my warm light to highlight up here, if that makes sense. So I didn't really leave a strong mid-shadow. I more just kind of judged where my light sources were going to meet, and yeah, you can see that there is kind of a shadow going up in that direction. But I didn't emphasize it like you see some art emphasize it. And I think you wouldn't emphasize it until you get big. So this is David's work. This is my husband's work. This is a Mark Maslin's bust, so it's big, as you can see. Comparatively speaking, it's very, very big. But you can also see you can do a lot more traditional art techniques here. Now, this is a directed lighting bust. You can see the strong shadow of the chin here. This is why I say my husband's amazing. You can see the shadow on the top of the arm from the upraised hand. So if you're doing busts like this, you absolutely can do pretty much any technique you would be doing on canvas. You can do that strong directed lighting so that you can see where the light, like David is so good at telling you where the light is coming from, and you can see it on this model. Taylor Swift fan, obviously. But again, he's working with a directed light from the front, and he's painting the back of the model in shadow, except where you can see the transmitted light and the slight amount of light from up here. Mostly transmitted. So he likes to do this. I hate leaving the back of the model in shadow. I don't enjoy it. And so I tend to do the overhead diffused where I still have highlights all around the model. There's a general light from above that's coming down, either bounce light or it's just like a hazy day. That's where I prefer to live. I like directed lighting sometimes. We did it on Troll. I tend to prefer it on larger models. Troll here. He also has an overhead light, but since he's leaning over, I made the light coming from this side much more strongly, and I kept this side in shadow. So I'm capable of doing it. I like the effect on limited models, but in general, on the small stuff, I don't like it as much. I find it's hard to project that with the scale. It doesn't look as cool, essentially, the smaller model you get. So yeah, so that's a strong lighting effect that is still an overhead effect, but it can be fun, right? But yeah, so you can do everything that you can do in 2D, you can do it on a 3D. It's a little more challenging because you've got to you got to be looking at the figure in the round, right? But as mentioned, taking pictures, like you say, good idea. All right, I think that's all my show and tell today. One second while I remove everybody to a safe location. But yeah, much as it's realistic, I'm not a fan of painting the back sides of things in shadow. I just find it boring. And I wanna be able to do texture and stuff all over, so. Yeah, exactly. Yep, Turgeon has it. Yeah, the Taylor Swiftie concert goer was ReaperCon Best in Show for 2023 Lunatic Design. So yeah, it depends on what you want to do. Like with the Mousy, we every once in a while will do a strong directed light, just to show, mostly to show how to mix the shadows, right? With stuff like that. So I keep Mousy around. Ron's not going to get Mousy. I like him too much. But I'm much more likely, my standard figure is really just going to be overall, like, I still put a shadow here. You can see that he's got a shadow on his chest because he is hunched over because he's a knoll. But overall, I've got very consistent light on this figure. And I find that just looks better on a 28, in my opinion. I am not everybody, but that's the way I like to paint for these little guys. Yeah, exactly. And like with Mousy, you can light that shadow. You can put a cool bounce light or even a warm bounce light in that shadow. But that's more advanced, right? That's a lot more advanced. So since Lunatic's coming from a 2D art design, they might have a better idea of where they're coming from as far as doing that bounce light. But yeah, all those kind of conceptual stuff that you're going to do, you can do on a miniature. And you can do that stuff on these little guys. I just feel like it doesn't do... Yes, he did. It's freehand. Yep, he bitched about it constantly, by the way. I love freehand. He does not. So whenever he's stuck doing it, he complains and complains and complains. Yeah, he complains and complains and complains, and then puts out something that wins Best in Show, and then he still complains. Yes, we listened to Taylor Swift nonstop for like 2 months. I know more. I could have maybe named one Taylor Swift song prior to that point. I can now recognize a Taylor Swift song instantly. It was kind of funny. Though the only song of hers I have on my playlist is Antihero, but yes, he sculpted it specifically to have something new for his classes, because before he had the lumberjack dude, Quinny's second favorite after my necromancer, which she now owns. But yeah, dude was cool, but it wasn't as much fun as that model. So yeah, now if you take a class with Mark now, he will use the Swifty model. It's gonna be the Swifty model for me. I'm sure he based it on his girlfriend. Yeah, I did. I liked it. David didn't like it as much. Like I thought it was as good in a different way because it was more moody, right? But Taylor's original version also rocks. So David very much prefers Taylor's version. I think because David is just not a moody person. Like, you know, the vibe of that. Like, it's much more angsty, Korniko. So David is not an angsty individual. This is why I love him so much. It's like, he may not always be a ray of sunshine, but he's never a downer. My husband is never a downer. Because he just doesn't let that stuff throw him. He doesn't dwell on it. He's got a really high positivity, mindset. I love it. It's so good. Such a good vibe. So, but I do really like the Dermot Kennedy version. If you want to hear a really angsty, slow version of Antihero, do look up that one on YouTube. I feel like it gets I feel like it really brings out the negative emotions more. Which, because it is a very, scary song if you look at the lyrics. About the price of fame. So I mixed a little bit of my brown liner into my mid here, or into my new... It's going to be a highlight, essentially. Just a little, though, and then I'm just going to take this over. Any more brownish colors I'm going to be introducing with glazing and layering. I'm not going to double down on it in the mix. Yeah, she's got great writing. There's no question that Taylor writes great songs. I kind of I tend to like when these when these artists who the female artists who got famous when they were kids, as they get older, I tend to really like how their songwriting develops. Avril Lavigne is another one. Her album that I picked up a couple years ago was after she almost died from Lyme disease. Boy, it is a different album than anything she was doing when she was like in her teens or 20s. In fact, it got panned by a lot of her fans because they didn't like it because it was too serious. But I loved it. Alrighty, so I'm thinning down my paint here because I'm starting to add white. I'm starting to go with lighter colors. The minute you go with a lighter color, even if you have not added extra white, you are adding extra white because there is white in this color. You know it's there. If you really want to listen to a kick butt song by somebody who's survived like a bad I'm gonna die moment, it's Avril Lavigne. So if you went through the 80s and 90s, you know who Avril is. And the song is, one second, I'll even get it for you. Because I really believe this album is amazing. It's got some fun poppy songs on it too, but it definitely, there we go. Let me get that. Head Above Water. So it's the title of the album. And it's the first song, and it's Kuro. I think of you sometimes when because of what you've gone through too. It spoke to me too because I had one of those moments when I was getting diagnosed with my crap and going through infinite surgeries. Too much whiny white boy emo rock, but that's a power ballad. That Head Above Water track. That's a like I'm gonna live through this. God damn it. Like power ballad. I love it. It makes me cry, but I love it. So yeah, would recommend. There, as I said, there's also some good. So there's some good wistful love kind of songs and some fun songs on that album as well. But there's also some definite girl power songs. So. Yeah, look up the whole. Honestly, there's only like 2 songs on that album I don't listen to. After I listened to the 4th or 5th one that I liked, I was like, all right, I'm just gonna buy the album. Just gonna buy it. Gonna give her money. And then I read about the background of it and her Lyme disease battle, and I was like, oh, that explains a few things. So as I'm putting this on, you can see the brushstrokes a little bit, but it's mostly blending in pretty well. So that means I've got my paint consistency good here. Again, if I feel like I'm getting like a definite demarcation, I can reach for my previous shadow. I am going to thin that now. So whereas my gray that I mixed with brown liner was my base coat, I am now going to thin it and use it as more of a layering tool to blend in my new layers. Head Above Water, yeah. Head Above Water by Avril Lavigne. She's got a voice on her, man, that girl. Whew. I love strong female vocals. It's why I do love like Taylor. Like she can also nail those. So I can use that darker gray here to just do a little bit of blending to make this be a little bit more seamless. Because any metal that's as dull and aged as this is not going to have a really sharp demarcation line between like highlight and shadow. It's going to blend. We have this little dent going back here. I'm going to get a little bit of a highlight on the bottom edge of that to bring it out. You can see that. Got a little bit too light down there. And you can be a little patchy with this if you don't want to blend it. because I'm probably going to stipple in some additional like rust and corrosion here. I'm not going to keep a very smooth blended effect, but at the same time, I start out that way. That way, at least, if anything doesn't get wiped out by the highlighting, then I've got that transition. Sometimes I probably do overthink my blending if I'm going to be going over the top with texture, but yeah, I enjoy it. So we'll just keep that so we're starting to blend in that. Yeah, I'm an Alanis fan already, also. I have been all along. I have a lot of Alanis on my phone. All those female artists who acknowledge their dysfunction. Because we are all dysfunctional on some point. So just blocking in a little bit of shadow here. Not sure. This sword is flat to the overhead, so it's not really going to have... it doesn't really have a shadow, but I can get that groove painted in. Probably I'll just pick the front angle to do light from. So if you've got a sword that's on the flat like this, look at it how it's oriented in other ways. So we have a frontal light coming from above on Ed. So the skeleton, when it comes around, it's going to have light coming from frontal this direction. And that means that if you want to do an NMM effect on the blade, and you have to pick an angle even though it's flat, you can choose that highlight angle being the side that's pointed forward. Alanis all day, though, can be dangerous at Reaper Slayer. I remember when I was in my office when I was still a staff painter. I don't remember if John's still here. I don't remember. I don't know. He might remember who it was, but Dave was in his office just with the door closed, like blasting Alanis all morning. And in the afternoon, he fired 2 or 3 people. So Alanis became like a danger sign in my head. It's like when Dave is playing Alanis, it's very dangerous at Reaper. I've never thought of Alanis in music in quite the same way since. So I'm gonna do some light and dark bands here. I think I can. Yeah, so at least at that point of the time, Alanis was Dave's Get Mad at Fire People music. And Dave hates firing people, so he comes off as scary, but I know Dave hates it. So, this is psych himself up. Get mad. Take names. So yeah. My go-to then became, after that, was, if Dave is in his office with the door closed playing Alanis, go away and come back later. Alright, so I'm going to get a light down the edge of that. There isn't a lot of room on this sword either, and it's definitely, we're going to put some corrosion on it. I'm probably going to wipe out a lot of this again, but I want the underlying to be there and to look right, so that after I rust it, any pieces that show clean do look correct. So now I've got to get that upper edge of that the fuller line down the middle of the blade. She still slays on stage, yeah. I'll remember that. If I get a chance to see her in person, I'm sure I would enjoy that concert. to thin down my white a bit. I'm going to thin it as much as I have to, but I'm not going to go for a full 2-to-1 today, I think. I want it to be, it needs to be thin enough so that I can do these little tiny like lines on the blade, right? But it also needs to be thick enough so that I get a bright line the first time and I don't have to go over it again and again. So my thinness, it needs to still look pretty strong, like it does. But if I pull my brush through it, I want to see it going back together. I want to see it self-level. That way I know that it's going to flow off my brush okay. If you drag your brush through the paint and it doesn't close up the groove right away, that means your paint is thick enough that it's not going to flow off your brush easily. I think you can be both. I think you can be all. Like, I'm not necessarily a 70s fan, but Tina Turner, if you don't like Tina Turner, something's wrong with you. That's just me, though. Still, Tina, all the way. Also just a generally exemplary human being. Sad loss, for sure. So I'm going to just do kind of an alternating, a little bit of a highlight on the edge, and then knock it back. I'm going to also put this highlight on the fuller, and I'm going to keep it about where I've put my edge highlights on the blade. So just to suggest a little light glancing. It's true, Turgeon, it's true. I like 70s rock too, hokey 70s rock, because it's what I grew up on because my dad listened to it. So, I mean, I was born in 72, so I didn't really start listening to music until I was like around 10 though, when Thriller came out, 82. Like I was conscious of music before then, but I wasn't conscious of like the bands producing it, and I didn't like, you know, like it didn't click in my little child head that it was something to like pay attention to until the kids at my school were paying attention to it, and then I was like, oh, okay, I get this. Yeah, music, it's a thing. I went a little bit rogue in my high school. I didn't like a lot of the mainstream stuff. What are some of my, I don't know that I have a lot. Boom. I want my playlists. 80s. Going to see if there's any like go-to women. I love the Indigo Girls. I don't think I've got a lot. Most of the women I listened to were parts of bands rather than themselves. Yeah. You started earlier than me, Crows. I would say that I was 9 or 10 when I started really paying attention to music and loving it. All right, so I wanted that harsh white here, but I don't want it on the helmet and everything else. And I need to do that wash too, so let's do that. So we're getting close. Yeah, that's what that was. They said up in the chat there, Polly. Somebody else had mentioned Slayer. Slayer said she was really good when she saw her recently. Probably the band that kicked the most butt when I saw them live would have been, as far as the concerts I've seen, would be REM, Michael Stipe. That man has serious energy on stage. Just gonna shake up my sealer because, as you know, if you do not, you have issues later. You really want to get, that's most of it has gone out. I can see that little bit of ghosty stuff down there? That is matting agent, and my agitators are stuck into it as well. But I've gotten most of it off of the bottom, and you definitely want to get most of it off the bottom before you squeeze it out. If you don't, then eventually, as your brush on sealer level drops lower and lower, it'll get frostier and frostier because the matting agent is sitting down there. And the higher percentage the matting agent is of your mixture, the more flat it gets until you get frosty. So since I've got those agitators sticking down there in that layer, I'm going to just take the butt of my brush, I'm going to put it in here, and I'm going to scrape it around the bottom edge to get those agitators out of there. And that'll help, it'll help keep everything in solution. Also, those are actual, this is an old enough bottle, those are actual metal skulls. There we go. Alright, I've gotten them loosened up. You can see my brush move in there. That little skull is just wedged in. It does not want to move. It's wedged into the bottom lip there. It's like, no, do not liberate me. But I got the other one up. So now, I can shake this again. Oil washes are, okay, so you can't paint acrylic over the top of them. So, unless you seal. Technically you could seal and do it, but you wouldn't get as good of a tooth of your underlying design. Yeah, bye Crowley. Thanks for hanging out. But, so, the thing that oil washes are good on is metal. So if you are doing the technique they do in historicals, where you're working with a metal model and you've kept parts of it bare metal so that you can burnish it and make it essentially work with the actual metal, putting oil washes over that can give you really cool effects, really beautiful effects. But in general, unless you're painting the whole figure in oils, which people do, I got a figure that I tried in oils, and I remembered my hatred of mineral spirits. There. Now I can hear you can hear the clickies. You know that you're good then. We've got all of our stuff in solution. I'm going to give this a good shake. So, like, it's always, whenever you ask things like, is X any good? It depends. It's always going to depend, lunatic. Every single thing you see on the market is useful to someone, if it's still on the market. If it doesn't release and bomb and go away, it's useful. If you do some Google searches, you will find, like, stuff telling you how it can be useful. But whether it is useful to you or any good for you depends on how you're painting. I'm going to put some of this sealer into my brown liner mix. If I can get it to actually unclog, I will anyway. Using my pokey tool to unclog my, oh no, too much. I was afraid that was going to happen. It was like there was resistance, and so I was like, oh no, it's going to blurk. That's alright though. We can add more brown liner to it, it'll be fine. So I really flooded it. But that's okay. Actually, that worked okay. So what the sealer does is it makes it more transparent without giving you a watery consistency, so it's going to hold it together. I still want to put a drop of water in there. Actually, you know, lunatic, that works. I mean, any plan can work, but just to let you know, terrain, I guess it depends on the terrain. You can certainly take techniques you would use on miniatures and use it on terrain, but in general, terrain tends to be its own beast. Like, it's its own thing. Like, I dry brush and wash terrain. I don't hardly use dry brushing and washes at all on my miniatures. Like, I use techniques on terrain that I don't use on miniatures. But it depends on how much work you're going to put into the terrain. So, it can be more or less complicated than minis, depending. Right, Agent Marvel? Depending. Like, one of our people that watches us regularly, you guys will know, is D. Clearman, and he was very nice and printed me out a 3D building from a Kickstarter that I had missed. And I'm looking at that thing, and it is complicated. It is tons of pieces. I'm going to have to, like, get Jigsaw Puzzle Brain on to figure out how this thing goes together. Right, Bryce has a point, right? So that's the thing, Lunatic. Like, you will... Terrain is going to be easier for you, probably, because if you don't have the fine motor, like, because you're used to canvas, if you don't have the super detail, it'll help you tune down your brush control, maybe, to that point. If you concentrate on bringing out details on some of the stuff that you're painting. Most people don't bother, but if you're using it as a practice tool to get into miniatures, then that's perfectly fair. All right, so doing a really lightweight wash. You can see how that brings out the details. It's a Tom Meyer chainmail, so it's ridiculously fine. It's not going to do everything, but it's going to be good enough. The wash that I ended up on looks like this. So you can see how very lightweight it is. I just wanted something really subtle because I didn't want to lose a lot of my underlying color because I can't repaint over this fine texture. It's just ridiculous. So if I repaint over it, it's going to be a pain in the butt. So I wanted to keep a lot of my gray in place, but I wanted to bring out these little links, and I think that did it. But yeah, I mean, any way you want to start the hobby, start it. You may do terrain, and then you may move to miniatures and say, oh, this is different. Or you may say, oh, I can see how I can use what I learned over here. And everybody's journey is different. It's just like any aspect of art. It's like writing. I can say this, having now published 2 books. All of it is your journey is going to be like unlike anybody else's. You will have similarities to some people, but you should always try it. Even if it doesn't work for you, you're going to understand more about why it didn't work, and that's going to be a win. So go in with an open mind and do whatever and have fun. That's the rule number 1 is have fun, and rule number 2 is there is no one way to do anything in this hobby. Oh, you do maps, yeah. So you've got fine motor. If you can do maps, then you should be all right. Like, look into stuff like Google Miniatures Sketch Style. And what you're doing with Sketch, that might work for you. If you're a very linear person, and I was too, because I'm very much a drawer. I came from 2D, but mostly on the drawing end. So, things you can do with Sketch are you do your zenith, but then you refine it. So here's an orc I'm working on in comic book style. So my first prime, my overall prime, you can see the zenith prime up here. But then what I did is I came down and I put in my textures. Yeah, I think I'm gonna finish this coming year, Bryce. Kind of in the mood again. So what you do then is you take your zenith as a suggestion, but you come in with your black, your white, and your gray, and you actually underpaint with the textures that you're intending to use. Then you go over the top of it with a heavy wash, like just so you can still see the underlying effects. Then you go back and you highlight. So if you're an illustrator, if you do a lot of line work, which sounds like you do, and I certainly used to, this can be really good for you because you're using a lot of the same techniques that you would use with the pen. You're just using it with a brush and you brush work your maps. I know a lot of comic book artists will do brush instead of pen, and it's a very individual choice. But using a long, thin brush is not that different from pen. So you can utilize those skills, and then you're just imagining the light, which the zenith is already helping you with, and you're just like putting in, like for me, I'm stippling the white and the gray here, keeping some of my black. I'm just putting in all of these textured strokes so that when I put my base over this, it's going to be thinned base, and all this work is going to show through. So look up sketch style painting, because if you really are, if you love your pen work, that can be a great way to get a very good looking miniature in not nearly as much time. And then from there, the point is you can use this as a starting point, and you can bring it up as much as you want, right? For me, this is comic book for me. So this is my trying out comic book. So I'm working with black shadows that are cross hatching. I'm emphasizing my brushwork. And I'm going to be, there's my cross hatch on there. So this is a very different style, but I hadn't ever done it and I really wanted to. So this is a work in progress, obviously. But I decided sketch style would be very good for this, because I'm going for a more modern style of comic book. So, but that is a technique that if you are a drawer like I am, this can be a really good mini painting technique, especially if you're planning to work on bigger stuff, which it sounds like you are. So this is a model, by the way, this model is awesome. It's Orc, I think it's an Orc Marauder or Orc Berserker from Black Sun Miniatures. I would have to look up his, maybe I have his tag in this box. Am I actually using his tag? Orc Rager. 1/12 scale, so he's meant to be huge. You have just failed? That's why I had to set it down for a while, Bryce, because I was like, there are parts of it I'm really happy with, and there are parts of it I'm like, meh. I have a hard time drawing this way, actually. I did a lot of pen and ink when I was in high school, but it was it was either ultra realistic in architecture, or it was super stylized, even beyond the point of comic books, where things were broken down into like shapes, where it was very, 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 very Art Deco, very Art Nouveau. And so that style of comic book that I'm doing there is really kind of in the middle. And so it is a challenge. That's why I had to put it down for a while. I was like, this is hard. I'm going to grab my red real quick, guys, and block in this that cloth. I think we were using Ergothoa or Asmodeus or Deep or something. I'll grab Ergothoa. It's a soiled red. Yeah, I like my orc a lot, though. I still feel like the cheekbone isn't right, so that's what shut me down. Is I'm like, everything else I'm happy. That is just such a huge model. That is such a big bust that it just overwhelmed me at some point. But I'm starting to get back in the mood for it. Like, I have a really good start on it, so it's just like, well, I just need to sit down and work on this in the evenings with David once we're past the computer game addiction that we're currently in. I need to shake up this red a little better. But yeah, so yeah, look into that. Look into sketch style, Lunatic. It might be a good starting basis for you. It can be very fun and very artsy. I'm doing it a lot more contained with that comic book, but you can be real impressionistic with it, and it looks good, depending on what style you like. Although if you do maps, maybe you like a tighter style. I like a really tight, controlled style myself, which is different from a lot of the painters these days. But sketch can be as controlled or uncontrolled as you want it to be. Oh yeah, and if you're in the DFW, Texas area, Reaper Paint Club is a thing. And Zachariah there runs it. It's a good way to get yourself to sit down and paint for 4 hours on a Saturday. Or I guess you run it Sunday too, don't you? Oh, you're in Florida, okay. Well, one thing I will say, if you can spam my socials, Quindy or John or whoever feels like doing it, my YouTube channel has a Fundamentals of Miniature Painting series, Miniature Painting Fundamentals. I really go through everything from the most basic how to get a smooth base coat onward. So if you are, as sounds like you're just like thinking about tipping your toe in the water of miniatures, watching my foundation stuff could give you pretty much a good like run over pretty much everything. Certainly the basics, Lunatic, and then you can decide what to do and what not to do. Like, you don't have to use all of the fundamentals to have a good miniature. It's just having tools in your toolbox. So I talk about paint consistency a lot there. I show all of the techniques I tend to use on miniatures, pretty much all the standard stuff. I haven't gone into OS things like lighting and sketch style and stuff like that, because they're not really fundamentals. Those are conceptual techniques. And actually maybe that's what I need to do next, is conceptual techniques mixed in with, I'm going to do fundamentals in practice, where I show how to apply the fundamentals on various subjects, but maybe I need to do a conceptual techniques series, because I do need to address like those elephants in the room, the NMM, the OSL, the color theory. And those are all conceptual things. They're not mechanical techniques. They're all things that you think about. So we got that nice dark red there, and we can bring up that color. Inks, okay, so if they are Daler-Rowney or FW, the acrylic inks, those are not true inks. They're actually pigments, not dyes. So those will work just fine. David, in fact, my husband, uses them all the time. However, traditional artist inks, like some of the Pilot ones, the really beautiful transparent ones, those are true inks. They are dyes. And once you put those suckers down, they will bleed through your paint when you lay paint down on top of them. So the only place to use the traditional dye inks is in metallics, because they can't bleed through flake. So you can actually get some beautiful effects over metallic paints with those, especially silvers and steels, putting a lot of colors and shadows, but also golds and brasses. But otherwise, the acrylic inks, the Daler-Rowneys, the FWs, those are just fine to even mix with acrylic paint, because they're just super fine pigments in a specialized base. They are essentially washes. I guess I haven't done that video either for fundamentals but that's, I don't know, that's going to be materials. Ah, I need a new series. I need a sticky note. I need a sticky note. All right, what we got here? Hold on. Fundamentals. Materials. Conceptual techniques or concepts, miniature painting concepts. And then, and then in practice. There we go. That'll keep me in videos for the next 3 years. Oh yeah, hashtag sticky note for sure. Yeah, the materials would be easy. Paint lines, airbrush lines. There we go. I'm always looking for new YouTube material, new YouTube stuff, and I have this huge outline. The inks stuff, no, it's not a typical beginner thing. That's why it would be under materials. It's not under fundamentals. But it's under stuff you talk about, right? Yeah, bye, Lunatic. Yep, you know I'm here every weekday at around this time. If you need, once you start painting, if you have questions, pop on. Inks used to be a beginner's thing, though, to be fair, Agent Marvel, because it used to be the only way to do washes, or the established way to do washes. Now that so many washes and like the GW contrast paints and stuff, now that those are much more mainstream, now inks are no longer, they've fallen into relative obscurity. Midnight blue is a gray blue. Yeah, it's a dark gray blue. And with it's a little bit colder, Bryce. It's got some magenta in it. So if you were going to mix it, I would say maybe 3 drops of phthalo blue, 1 drop of black or half a drop of black, a touch of white to give it coverage, and a touch of magenta to bring it colder. And you'd get midnight blue. Alrighty, so we've got our happy little sword. Now we need to get stuff up on the helmet. But we're already a quarter after. Time check. Alright. It's too late, darn it. I'll have to go back to Skelly. I'll have to go back to Skelly in the future. But, hey, we got a lot of stuff talked about today. We did a lot of talking. And we did get Skelly all, like, he covered up all his primer. Quindy, you got totally carried away, too. Yeah, I can tell you what's in a color. I love, actually, Midnight Blue is one of my favorites. The only thing I would do to it now, because it was one of the first ones I made, if I could go back and remake the formula, I'd pop a bit more pigment into it, and then I'd be able to load a little more white in and give it a little bit better coverage. But with those beginning triads, a lot of the shadows are really meant to be washes, so a little transparency is welcome. At the same time, when people just to get people to use the color more, I'd do that. But yeah. Yes, happy holidays, everybody. Tomorrow, hey guys, tomorrow we're finally on to little Bridge Mouse. Bridge Mouse gets to fight her friend, or her not friend, her unfriend. So we are going to work on the Mouseling tomorrow. Yay, Mouseling! And we're gonna have some fun. We'll do the fur. And it'll be a good time. Get her face going on. She's got to look determined. She's got big eyes, too, so I can do big blue eyes on her. Or purple. Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Quindy and John, for riding herd on the stream. Thank you for coming in, everybody. Oh, yeah. Muslings are fun. And, yeah, have a great day, everybody. I'll see you tomorrow morning. Bye-bye.